Hey guys, welcome back. It's Neon. We're going to talk more about DC Comics and the comic book industry. I'm really thinking that we are in the end days of the direct market, that we are watching the direct market be sunset right before our very eyes. It's kind of dying in real time, and it's very, very sad. It's very sad to see this happen to the comic book industry. But you know, a lot of what led up to this, in my opinion, was denial. Denial that the comic book industry is in sad shape right now, at least the mainstream industry. There are other options, and we will talk about that. But denial from the big two, Marvel and DC Comics, denying that there were problems in the comic book industry, denying that sales were plummeting, glossing over the fact that comic book shops were closing at a shocking rate, glossing over the fact that sales were dropping and that they had to publish more and more material at a higher price point just to break even. And now it's look, this is an open secret. It's an open secret. The comic book industry, the mainstream comic book industry, is on the skids, and Dan Didio is actually calling out the speculator market driving the appearance of a healthy industry. Wow, this is actually pretty surprising, because a lot of these executives at DC and Marvel Comics had their heads in the sand for so long. You know, they would attack YouTubers and bloggers who called it out, who said that the comic book industry is in decline. They would bury their heads in the sand, or worse, attack bloggers and YouTubers, not Dan Didio personally, but other people working for him. You know, and they just didn't want to hear it. They did not want to hear that the market was not doing well. And here it is, straight from Dan Didio himself, the publisher of DC Comics. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about DC's other plans to sort of stave off the demise of DC Comics, I guess. They're going to try to reinvent their digital strategy, and they're also going to bank more heavily on the Walmart comics, the thicker Walmart comics, which I'm actually a pretty big fan of, but they're going to branch out into the TV and movie properties too. They're going to do comics based on the TV shows and the movies. So apparently this is the plan to save DC Comics, guys. I don't know how it's going to go, but before we get into the video, thank you so much for subscribing. All of you who have subscribed over the last couple months, we have grown at a pretty alarming rate. We're almost at 50,000 subs. And when we first started voicing some mild opinions last year about the state of pop culture and comics in particular, we never expected to hit 50,000 subs, and certainly not within the course of a year. So thank you so much for that. Your support means a lot to us, and we want to keep bringing you videos. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Please do so. Okay, so this is coming from Bleeding Cool. I had to turn the ads off. Had to turn most of the ads off on Bleeding Cool because I don't want a virus. But here we go. Dan Didio calls out speculator marketing driving appearance of a healthy industry, by Jude Terror. Jude Terror, who I think is the original comics gator. Actually, he had some very harsh words for the industry a couple of years ago. Harsh words that comics gators and YouTubers would later echo, and then Jude Terror actually kind of attacked them for it. So it's very odd. But Jude Terror has been very critical of the comic book industry, and this article is no exception. So in a move that we have to admit is pretty shocking, not really, DC publisher Dan Didio, more than 6 years since we launched the Has DC Done Something Stupid Today website, has finally come out and said something pretty damn smart. Echoing some of the points we've been making for years here at Bleeding Cool, and before that at the Outhouse, Didio called out speculator marketing and other gimmicks used by comic book publishers, read Marvel, to give the appearance of a healthy industry despite not actually doing anything to increase the readership of individual titles. This is true. Marvel just publishes a bunch of crap, a bunch of books. You know, it's all about the numbers. It's all about the dollar share. It's all about looking good to Disney to justify their existence. And DC's in a place right now where they need to justify their existence to Warner Media. If you watched our previous video talking about this, DC's in a very precarious place right now. Warner Media is cleaning house. They're cleaning house at a shocking rate, and they're probably going to turn an eye to DC Comics and be like, you know, do we really need to publish new comic books anymore? since the old stuff sells pretty well, since Watchmen sells well, since The Dark Knight sells well, you know, do we really need all these new comics, and do we need to trim the fat over at DC? And they've already done it. They've shut down Vertigo, they shut down Mad Magazine. So yeah, DC is in a fight for its life here, and so Dan Didio, I guess, you know, he doesn't have to mince words anymore. He can just come out and say it, because he might not have a job next year anyway. Didio's comments came as part of a discussion on the DC performance and current market conditions in an interview with ICV2. So this is what Dan Didio said. He said, "Where my concern comes from is more about the over-reliance on nostalgia, speculator marketing, variant covers, and a lot of things that seem to be driving numbers and sales to give the appearance of a healthy industry, but it's not built on the ongoing success of the individual titles in order to keep those numbers successful and maintained." This is true. Comics number ones do very well. Gimmicks do very well, but you know, once the comic gets a little long in the tooth, I mean, hell, they're canceling comic books before they hit issue 10. In some cases, before they hit issue 6. Back in the day, they would give a comic at least, you know, 25 issues and see where they're at. Not now, not now. It's all about the number ones. It's all about the number ones. If we're creating these artificial highs on a continual basis, if something pulls that apart, does it break the infrastructure overall? And how do we change these buying patterns in that fashion to build something that is a more healthy business going forward? Of course, selling comics based on gimmicks like variant covers rather than the actual content of the books helped tank the industry in the 90s. Yeah, there was a huge crash in the mid to late 90s. A lot of comic shops went out of business, but you know what? A lot of comic shops are going out of business now. So despite an opportunity to learn lessons that nearly saw Marvel run out of business, the industry has spent the last decade seemingly repeating the same mistakes. Very, very true. In addition to variant covers, we also see constant number one relaunches, super mega crossover event tie-ins, like every damn year. It used to be a big deal when Marvel would do like one of these mega crossover events. You know, it was a big deal because it didn't happen very often. And now it's every year. Every year, they're just building up to the next event. Inflated issue prices that make certain publishers' dollar share seem high, even if the actual per capita readership is low. Again, talking about Marvel and their freaking $8 books, right? It's encouraging to see someone in a position of power like Didio not only recognize this, but seemingly try to do something about it, with DC reducing the number of titles on a monthly basis, resulting in more readers for each title, even if DC isn't immune to going for some of that sweet speculator cash on occasion. So that's true. I'd rather see, again, this is, you know, my choice if I were running a comic book publisher. I'd rather see 10 or 12 or 20 titles do well than have 100 titles that don't do well, or 50 titles that don't do well. You know, I'd rather make sure that, you know, Superman and Batman are selling over 100,000 issues every month consistently than, you know, spread it too thin amongst a bunch of unproven titles. Now, the downside of that, of course, is there aren't going to be a lot of chances being taken because they're going to rely more heavily on proven sellers. But if the comic book industry, if the direct market is healthier, then there actually is a little elbow room. You actually can take a chance on new titles and, you know, hopefully give them a little more time to find an audience than, you know, 6 or 10 issues. So here's Didio again. The periodical numbers have been strong for us. Our idea to bring down the number of books, I think, is working for us. It allows us to spend more time to improve the creativity of the material, which is what we feel is important right now. The young adult line is starting to catch fire with Raven Book. It's been exciting for us. They're talking about Black Label doing really well. So this is interesting. You know, DC, again, just a week ago, not even a week ago, we did a video talking about how Warner Media is looking to trim the fat. They might be looking at DC Comics and be like, okay, what is your plan? Do you have a plan? You know, your comic book publishing is not really doing that well. The comic book industry is not one we really feel like we need to be in, because we can just reprint, you know, Dark Knight and Watchmen endlessly and print money and not have to pay artists and writers to make new stuff that may or may not sell. So what is your plan, Dan? And Dan's like, well, we're going to try to pare down the titles, and we're going to try some other channels. They're going to try digital. They're going to try digital again. DC plans to reinvent digital strategy as sales continue to flatten. Now, I remember a few years ago, well, there are two ways of looking at this. A few years ago, digital was going to be the savior of comics Everybody was going to buy comics digitally. That was going to save comics. Digital sales are what kept the quote-unquote SJW Marvel titles afloat. That was the rumor, even though we really don't have any concrete numbers from Comixology to support that. That was Marvel's story, right? That a lot of these titles that maybe did not sell well in the direct market made up for it in digital sales. I have a hard time buying that. Just because, you know, at least with the Marvel and DC titles, they charge damn near as much for a digital download as they do for a print comic. I mean, $3.99 for a 22 to 32 page comic is absolutely insane. What does work, I think, is something like Shonen Jump, where it's $1.99 for all you can read. Now, if they do something like that, and I think they actually do something similar to that with the DC subscription service, the streaming service, you know, that might help. But again, digital's really kind of iffy, and a lot of old school comic fans, the ones that actually spend the money, don't like to read comics digitally. Now, also, there was a time not too long ago that DC and Marvel Comics and Image Comics and all of these print publishers threw shade at people doing digital comics, whether it was web comics or downloads. They basically, you know, threw shade at people doing comics digitally and said they weren't real comics. So it's kind of funny now to be like, yeah, we're going to bank on that. Just like crowdfunding. You know, they used to throw shade at crowdfunding comics, and then you've got companies like Fantagraphics and Archie and a lot of image creators doing crowdfunding campaigns now. So just very funny that, you know, it's a good idea if it comes from them, but not if it comes from the riffraff, right? So as DC expands its digital footprint via DC Universe subscription service, that's what it's called. I don't have it, don't really care. Sales are falling flat for the publisher in one area, its own comics. So Jim Lee noted in an interview during Comic-Con International that digital comic sales haven't grown like the publisher had hoped. At least they're admitting it. They're admitting it. Digital comics just don't, you know, I don't think they're really where it's at, to be honest. I think it's a good supplemental income, I guess, but I don't see where they're going to replace print. On the digital side, I think it's been pretty flat in recent years, which is a little disheartening. And that's with DC being one of the few publishers that actually creates or did create exclusive comics for digital. So Lee acknowledged subscriptions to the publisher's DC Universe platform were on the rise for the TV shows, not the comic books, but noted the impact on digital sales. A lot is moving to subscription, and that is having a downward pressure on transactional sales, he noted. But I think it's discouraging in general because everyone talks about digital being the future. If there's anything that should continue to grow year in and year out, it should be that channel. The fact that it's kind of plateaued and we've hit a wall speaks to a lot of different things. We need to reinvent what we're doing. So basically, people are subscribing to DC Universe for the TV shows, not for the comics. They're throwing the comics in. Again, I don't have a subscription to DC Universe. I don't really care. The only subscriptions I have to digital comic services, we have Comixology Unlimited, which is actually pretty limited because they give you maybe the first issue or two of a series and you have to buy the rest individually. And we have Shonen Jump, which I freaking love. I think Shonen Jump, to me, is the best paid for subscription comic service out there. And it's all manga, but it's brilliant. I love it. And I love that, you know, you can buy the comics directly through the app too, which is pretty cool. So yeah, they have access to over 20,000 digital comics. Again, people aren't subscribing to DC Universe for the comics, and Warner's got to be looking at this too. I think this is all about what Warner Media is asking DC Comics. They're asking them to justify their existence because they're like, well, people will subscribe to DC Universe for the TV shows, but are they subscribing for the comics? And the short answer is no. In fact, until recently, I didn't even know that DC Universe included a subscription to the comics. I thought, you know, it just had the TV shows and maybe a couple comics. I did not know it had 20,000 back issues on it. But that doesn't change my mind about it. I'm not really into it. So, Titans, I have no interest in. I have no interest in Doom Patrol or any of these other shows. So for me, it's kind of like, I don't really care. I don't care. So another channel they're looking at is Walmart. And again, we're banking on TV, because they're going to expand their comic book line. And now I do love the Walmart books. I think it's a sweet price point, $5 for like 100 comics, 100 pages of comics. Rather, I think it's a good price. It's a good product. If you can find them, it's very hit or miss. It took us a while to find them, and they're kind of buried in the back corner of Walmart. They're usually over by the trading cards and stuff. But now they're going to expand their Walmart line to include TV and movie properties. Again, the comic book industry at this point is basically a parasite. It's a parasite that has attached itself to Hollywood. You know, it can't survive without Hollywood. It can't survive without the brand recognition from the movies. It can't survive without the revenue from the movies justifying the existence of these comic book publishers. And that's very, very sad. I mean, that's not a healthy industry. The comic book industry is a parasite that has to attach itself to Hollywood to survive. And so now, to get more people to buy the comics, they're going to bank on their TV shows. So they talked about the 100-page giants, and they said that there are currently 6 titles, if you can find all of them, and they're going to continue to expand it to include DC's live-action properties. So we're continuing the program in September. Didio said the books are starting to come into the direct market too. I know a lot of retailers are complaining. We actually have a couple of chains that are looking into getting them in as well. So they're going to actually be available outside of Walmart. They're going to expand it. They said the new titles will be available at Walmart and other chains. Anything that has a show or anything that's going on in the media right now, we're trying to build those types of books. They go out into the mass market so that somebody more casually aware of our characters finds something to read and hopefully gets exposed to our worlds. Again, this is just, it's kind of sad. I mean, it is kind of sad because people used to pick up X-Men before there was even talk of an X-Men movie. You know, they picked up X-Men because it was a damn good comic, you know? And granted, you know, some of the Marvel titles like Spider-Man, etc. had the benefit of, you know, TV shows and Batman and all that, but so many of the really, really well-selling comic book titles of the 70s, 80s, 90s did not have tie-in media. They just sold well because the comic book industry was healthy. People were buying good comics, and they were just buying comics because they loved comics. And it just seems like now that comics is become like ancillary merchandise. It's like a t-shirt, you know? It's you'll buy this comic with, you know, the TV version of Doom Patrol or whatever because you like the show. You know, it's sort of like buying a novel adaptation of a movie. It's comics is, again, it's become a parasitic industry, and it's in trouble. And I think, you know, my takeaway from all of this is at least it's refreshing that DC Comics, that Dan Didio is addressing it. I just think it's 10 years too late. I think a lot of the problems now in comics could have been remedied 10 years ago. You look at publishers like Alterna, that's not, you know, it's not attaching itself to media, but they're putting comics out there at a low price point. They're putting comics out there for a general audience. They're getting their comics back into convenience stores and all kinds of other places, and they're doing really, really well. Whereas the big two are sort of shrinking, you know. But at least they're admitting there's a problem. I just think it's too late. I think it's too late to save the direct market. And I think, you know, Didio thinks it's too late to save the direct market too. This is why they're looking at digital. This is why they're looking at Walmart and mass distribution, because they realize the direct market is living on borrowed time. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.